Calls meeting to order. You have any substitutions today? Seeing none. Maybe the door going. Oh, thanks. We're now on returning to Bill 11, an act respecting proof of immunization, and we're on the amendment. I'll read the amendment as we left yesterday. Read through here too. The amendment said bill as follows: Section 1, subsection 2, strike out paragraph B2, second part, and substitute. Second part, for the purposes of subsection 10(1), subject to the approval of the Minister of Health, the proof of immunization of persons who are of school age and pupils, and if proof of immunization is insufficient, their admission to and attendance at school and we're open for comments. I forget where we're left off here. Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There we go. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of questions. Yes. So we had the evening to look over the amendment. So I've got a couple of questions for the Minister on this. So in the original bill, who would have been able to do this work? Is it education or is it at the school level?
So first, if I could ask the chair if it's okay if I stay seated to answer my questions. Okay with everyone? Thank you. Or ask the group. Thanks so much. Thank you through the chair. Thank you to the honourable member for the question. And currently, it will be handled by the Department of Education.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make that clear. So my concern with this amendment is that we're going to create another level of bureaucracy. So instead of having the Department of Education, who already have their hands in the vaccination file, now we're asking the Department of Health to get involved. And my concern is, how efficient will they be? Now, will there be back and forth to get information? What about privacy laws and all that kind of stuff? So I don't know if the Minister has any comments on that.
Through the chair, thanks to the member for that question. And yeah, that was. I mean, this is. When we looked at this amendment, it wasn't something that we thought would be a deal breaker because, of course, in any consideration around vaccines, we're talking to the Department of Health all the time to get the health information to help inform decisions around what's on the vaccine protocol for schools. So absolutely share the member's concerns around adding a layer of bureaucracy that Lord knows we have too much of in government anyway. But given the back and forth that already exists between departments on this, wouldn't be seen as egregious, I guess. So. Don't think that we necessarily need it. Don't see it as being something that undermines the intent of the bill. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you for the answer through the chair. So my question is, I would ask the Minister, does he think it's necessary to really have the Minister of Health get involved in this? What's his opinion on this amendment?
To the chair, through the chair to the member, don't think it is necessary, but don't view it as being again destructive or something that is going to hurt. But certainly, again, I think that the reason the bill was presented in the form it was is we felt that was sufficient to that any time you have decisions like this, of course, it goes through multiple layers of conversations where those discussions happen around health and so on. And of course, as we're seeing in relation to the public discussion around this bill anyway, that any discussions around vaccines is always going to be subject to a strong degree of public scrutiny. That's why I think that the bill in its original form just doesn't require this amendment, but again, don't see it as destroying the purpose of it. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Last question. I know I'm kind of, je tourne autour du pot, comme on dit en français. Mon problème ou la question, c'est que je ne veux pas créer un autre niveau de bureaucratie. Si que le ministère de l'Éducation a déjà du personnel en place pour justement gérer ce genre de demande, pourquoi demander au ministère de la Santé de faire la même chose? Est-ce qu'il va y avoir un dédoublement de service? Je veux dire, un ou l'autre, ça va être à la discussion du ministre, mais si on est déjà équipé pour le faire avec le ministère de l'Éducation, pourquoi le faire, dans le fond, avec le ministère de la Santé? Ça n'a aucun sens de ce côté-là. Déjà, on est critiqué au gouvernement que la bureaucratie est trop lourde, qu'il y a un dédoublement de services, qu'on travaille en silo. Pourquoi alimenter, dans le fond, ce genre de fonctionnement-là?
Président, merci pour la question. Et je suis en accord. Je pense qu'il y a déjà absolument les ressources qui sont déployées au niveau du ministère de l'Éducation pour assurer ce projet de loi, si ça passe à une loi, de l'implémenter sans la nécessité de créer un autre niveau de bureaucratie. En même temps, je sais qu'il y a assez de controverses autour de ce projet de loi que aussi pour essayer de créer un esprit d'ouverture pour dire aux membres de cette Assemblée que, regarde, nous ne sommes pas ici pour dicter les choses. Je suis absolument ouvert à inclure la perspective des autres. Et si cet amendement peut encourager les membres de l'Assemblée de dire oui, ceci est un projet de loi où on peut tout rassembler en tout, je pense que ça serait positif, de mon avis. Mais en effet, je suis en accord avec les membres de l'autre côté. Merci.
So, Mr. Chair, that's all the questions I have concerning this amendment. If there's no other, I would just like a break, about maybe 2 minutes, if there's no other comments.
Comments or questions? Recognize a member from...
Mr. Chair, just thank you, Mr. Chair. Just based on the discourse, the questions that were asked, so I guess my general question is, and what really is the intent of the amendment? I mean, if we're talking giving it to the Minister of Health, how does that improve or take away from the bill? I mean, what's the point?
Through the chair to the member, I think we'd have to ask the honourable member for Fredericton South that question, as it's his amendment, and he would be able to speak to it more powerfully than I would be able to. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Yeah, I guess that's all I have, and I know when I seen the amendment come in, I guess I kind of question what the point is, whether it helps with some type of exemption that's going to be taken away, or you know, the types of vaccinations. I just didn't see the point of it, I guess is all I'm saying. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Recognize a member from Fredericton South, Leader of his party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, so this is an amendment of a section of the Education Act which lays out powers of the minister, like it says, it may establish provincial policies and guidelines within the scope of this act, being the Education Act, related to public education, which, well, he's the Education Minister, that makes complete sense. But then related to the question of immunization, record keeping, and so on. Well, immunization actually is a public health matter, and there's been a lot of discussion about immunization from the Minister of Education, when it really is something that is, from a public health perspective, in the wheelhouse of the Minister of Health and his public health officials. So when it comes to, and I know the Minister isn't saying that this bill is designed to better protect the public health of students in our school system, that it's really designed to try and battle the anti-vax movement into submission, that maybe this isn't so pertinent to that point. But from my perspective, if we're talking about immunizations, and that means we're talking about public health, and we're talking about ensuring that immunizations are doing what they're supposed to do, and that is provide protection for those attending school, and that means maintaining herd immunity for the various particular infectious diseases the vaccines are directed at, and those are all things that are important to achieve. And it is my view that we need to better integrate health into this process, and so that was the reason I suggested that I'm proposing through this amendment that this be subject to the approval of the Minister of Health.
Thanks through the chair to the member. Yeah, and thank you for the explanation around the amendment. The only point I'd like to point out here is that this bill was actually submitted jointly by Education and Health, partly because of the fact that there was that ongoing existing collaboration between the two departments. And so I, again, wouldn't say it's necessary to have a further amendment, but again, understand the member's desire to further clarify and make sure that boxes are checked off, but I think the honourable member's concern earlier expressed around building bureaucratic structures in government is also well taken. So, thank you.
A short break here is unanimous. Just keep in mind we have half an hour left, unless you want to stay later this evening.
2.5 minutes.
Do we have 2 minutes? Consent agreed? 2 minutes? Recognize the member.
Thank you very
Back to
much,
Sheila.
Mr. Chair. Listen, so we had a quick chat. We have full confidence that there's already a good collaboration between the Department of Education and the Department of Health. We see this as more adding another layer to bureaucracy. So in that case, you know, I don't think we're going to be in favor of voting for this amendment. So we'll let the vote go, and then we'll show our hands.
Any other questions, comments?
Just through the chair to the honourable members, that I'd hope at the same time that this wouldn't prejudice those who sentiments around the bill are seen as being particularly distracting from the core purpose of the bill.
Okay. This is the pleasure of the committee that bill number, should know. Pleasure of the committee that bill number 11, sorry. Yes, it's the pleasure of the committee that the amendment for bill 11 stand as amended, and that I report the bill as amended. Oh, sorry.
Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt?
The committee to adopt the amendment. All those in favor say yea. Yea. All those contrary minded, nay. No. I believe the yeas have it. Oh, no. Stand. We have a request to record a vote.
All those in favor, please stand.
All those in favor, please stand.
Mr. Cardy. Madame Tellier, Mr. Lowe, Mr. Northrup, Mr. Austin, Mr. Chair, total yeas 4, total nays 6.
By opinion, the nays have it. Declare the motion defeated.
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions, comments?
Other questions, comments? Members? Recognize a member from Fredericton South, Leader of his party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that's missing from this bill is any provisions dealing with increasing awareness of and access awareness of vaccinations and their importance. There was a review by the U.S. Community Preventative Services Task Force a few years back, which suggested that before attempting to strengthen mandatory vaccine legislation, that actually things like strategies to increase awareness and access be attempted first. So one of the things I want to do is propose an amendment to incorporate a provision around education. So I would move to amend Bill number 11 as follows. At section 2, subsection 3, adding after subsection 42.11.1 the following, 42.11.1.1, the Chief Medical Officer of Health or the Chief Medical Officer of Health's delegate shall offer immunization education sessions to parents and independent pupils. Mr. Speaker, I think this would certainly be helpful for parents who are risk averse or a little hesitant and gotten worked up over things they've been hearing online from the anti-vax movement, and would give them the opportunity to actually get solid science-based information, and depending on how the education is carried out, if there's actual public sessions, to enable them to ask direct questions of public health officials, to have them answer to their satisfaction around a particular vaccination or vaccinations in general. So that's my motion.
Sure, I have the proper one up here. It's the section 2, subsection 3 paragraph, right? Okay, good. Just lost it there for a second. You do have your electronic version on there that's just been sent? Yes. We have an amendment, the bill as follows. Section 2, section 2, paragraph 3, article 2, add after subsection 42.11.1, the following 42.11, 1.1, the Chief Medical Officer of Health or the Chief Medical Officer of Health's delegate shall offer immunization education sessions to parents and independent pupils. Comments, questions? Recognize the member from Fredericton Grand Lake, Leader of his party.
This would be good if we didn't have mandatory vaccinations, because, or take out the exemption, I should say, but if you're removing exemptions and forcing parents to vaccinate their kids, what's the point of education? It's being forced by government. So I just, I don't know. Open to discussion on, I guess.
Okay, I just have one question. So the question that pops out to me is it part of her mandate, the Chief Medical Officer, to educate, like as we speak today? See what we can be answering.
Yes, go ahead.
the chair to the member opposite. So in consultations with public health around this amendment, they had no objection to it, but also it's important to state that this already happens, that public health is in the schools in grade 7 and 9 to do the voluntary booster and other shots that are available at those ages and offer video and other education services on school entry. And it's already part of that curriculum, and there's already that link that's there. So again, it's an amendment where I think the sentiment is admirable, but it's largely, again, work that's already being done. And so my concern there is that we be replicating work that's already happening and also enshrining it in law, which is often sort of a high level. We want this law to expressly state what this law is about, which, to the honourable member from Fredericton Grand Lakes' point, this law is about a vaccine, removing an exemption to a mandate, rather than about enhancing the role of public health, especially given that public health are already actually doing this work, according to their office. Thank you.
Questions? Seeing none? Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the amendment? All those in favor, please say yea. Yea. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. I believe the nays have it, in my opinion. I declare the amendment defeated. Yeah. Any further questions, comments on this bill? Recognize the member for Fredericton South, leader of his party.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we all agree that we want to ensure the vaccination programs delivered to children and youth are effective, that herd immunity is maintained, which means they're effective. The minister has presented not much evidence, but he has indicated that so far, with the exception, it's not reported yet on 2 school districts, but with the balance of the school districts, that those seeking exemptions under the mandatory immunization or vaccination law we have is around 1%. And that's not yet the information is not available in terms of what percentage of those are seeking medical exemptions and what our percentage are seeking exemptions, the exemption that this bill seeks to remove. One of the things that public health officials have said over and over again is that they're most concerned about the vast majority of people who want to have their kids vaccinated but lose track. And so you end up with inadequate levels of vaccination, not out of any kind of philosophical opposition, but just because life is busy. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, in its review of mandatory vaccination legislation and their exemptions in the United States, the Community Preventative Services Task Force there suggested that before you strengthen the mandatory vaccination legislation, that programs to improve access, such as reminder systems and comprehensive school-based vaccination clinics. So reminder systems, so your cell phone goes off and tells you it's time to, vaccinate so-and-so with this vaccination or this booster, and school-based comprehensive school-based vaccination system. So it generally can all happen in the school system, and that again takes away the need for vigilance on part of parents to ensure that all the various vaccinations and boosters have been done of their various children if they've got multiple children, Mr. Speaker. And so for me, that's from a public health perspective the goal. How do we maintain herd immunity, which so far we are, according to the Minister of Education, and ensure that the vast majority of people are continuing or increase the coverage of vaccinations who are in no way opposed to vaccination, just things fall through the cracks. If for those who have children, you know, life is very busy, and if you've got many children, it's downright crazy trying to keep track of everything. And so from a public health perspective, we need to make it as easy as possible to ensure that happens. And I don't see that we've done that. I don't think that we've made vaccinations for our students as easy as possible for parents, ensuring there's a comprehensive reminder system, ensuring there's comprehensive access to vaccination clinics right in the school system, which was more common perhaps in the past and seemed to work quite well. And the comprehensiveness of that has been lost. So for me, Mr. Speaker, I think that the removing an exemption at this time when the evidence suggests to us that herd immunity is present, that the vast proportion of parents want their children to be vaccinated, and that the vast majority of public health professionals are most concerned about those parents who are not actually kind of on top of the vaccinations for their children to ensure that they're getting them when they should, or getting the boosters when they should. So I'm not opposed to the idea that the tool should be available to remove the exemption on philosophical grounds if it turns out the evidence is such that we're seeing a significant utilization of that exemption that is actually undermining herd immunity in the schools, and that evidence hasn't been provided to this House, Mr. Chair. So my final amendment here would be to allow that tool to be available, but to leave it up to the Chief Medical Officer of Health to determine when it actually gets used. In other words, that it gets used when, in fact, we're seeing any kind of significant use of the exemption on philosophical grounds that actually is undermining herd immunity in our schools. So let's leave it up to the public health experts to determine that, not those in the education system. And so my motion is as follows: to amend this bill is strike out Section 5 of the bill and substitute Section 5(1), which would say, subject to subsection 2, this act or any provision of it comes into force on a day or days to be fixed by proclamation. And then 5(2), no provision of this act shall be proclaimed before the day that the Chief Medical Officer of Health publishes a notice in the New Brunswick World Gazette deeming the provisions of this act to be necessary to protect the public health of New Brunswickers, in which case this act comes into force on the day on which the notice is published. So you see, Mr. Chair, the idea here is that we put the authority back in the hands of the Chief Medical Officer of Health to protect public health, and not have it rest with the Minister of Education when it comes to the immunization of students in the school system. So this provides the tool that the Minister feels is important to put in place, provides access to that tool, but we don't see it implemented until it absolutely is necessary, in the opinion of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, our top public health expert in the province. And so that's the motion, and that's the rationale for it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do you have any comments? Read it first, sir.
Sure.
The amendment reads, amend said bill as follows: Section 5, Article 5, strike out Section 5 and substitute 5(1). Subject to subsection 2, this act or any provision of it comes into force on a day or days to be fixed by proclamation. 5(2), no provision of this act shall be proclaimed before the day that the Chief Medical Health Officer of Health publishes a notice in the New Brunswick Royal Gazette deeming the provisions of this act to be necessary to protect the public health of New Brunswickers, in which this act comes into force on the day on which the notice is published. Comments, concerns? Recognize a member for Fredericton South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry, member. I apologize. Should go back to the minister first.
Thanks very much, through the chair, to the members opposite. So I want to again reiterate that the honourable member raises a number of very good points around the importance of having tools and so on for vaccine information to be shared. Government is doing that. The Chief Medical Officer has a provincial-wide vaccine registration system that's currently being finalized and was in the final steps before COVID hit, so I'd anticipate it will be slowed up a little bit. One of the reasons for this bill having a September 2021 implementation date, to make sure that when this bill comes into force, that additional tool is already there and in place. This bill is not about that. But to take the members' points, because they are important related to this broader subject, we're missing data from 2 districts right now. We have over 1% already seeking exemptions. You talk about an accept a 95% herd immunity requirement, 3% for vaccine failures, over 1%. We are less than 1% away from losing herd immunity today without having information from 2 large school districts. So you may feel that provides a level of comfort. My concern is that every year right now, honourable member has been good at providing statistics, but the statistics around the growth of the anti-vaccination movement are there and compelling as well, and I'd encourage him to look at them, and I'm happy to share them if he has further questions on the subject. But on the specifics of the amendment, my concern is that this would remove a significant decision from elected legislators, because this is not about a public health registration system. This is about a philosophical and political decision to be made by the legislature, because this is about deciding on rights. And I've tried to dissuade anyone who supported this bill from the outset, say, oh, well, this isn't about taking anyone's rights. It is, absolutely. It's about talking to people who have concerns themselves over their kids, and for whatever reasons, and clearly I think most members of this House don't agree with those reasons, but those are still reasons. But we're talking about the balance of those rights compared to the rights of immunocompromised kids, sick kids, and the broader right of a population to be free from easily curable, safely curable diseases, safely preventable diseases. So when it comes down to a question of rights, this legislature has to speak. And I don't think it would be appropriate to cede that power to an unelected official to start being able to decide what goes into the Royal Gazette. That's what we're elected to do, and it's a responsibility that falls on us, and we should live with the consequences for good or for ill. So for that reason, I wouldn't support this amendment.
You recognize a member for Fredericton Grand Lake, Leader of his party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for my own clarification, we're actually debating 2 amendments, because we have the one on providing education from the Chief Medical Officer, and then we have this one on that. Okay. So I'm kind of hearing 2 things. I'm hearing it's not about health, but it is about health. And I can tell you, if I can't support the bill in its form, I think that's becoming clear. But if this bill were to pass, I would be more comfortable knowing that the Chief Medical Officer, in occasions where health crises are evident, and there's data and evidence to show that there is a public health crisis, that the Chief Medical Officer could invoke something in terms of vaccines would be easier for me to swallow than the bill in its original form. So I'm not so sure I like either, but I could probably go with the amendment.
Thank you. Back to the minister.
That, through the chair, just on that one of the issues, though, that just to take the member's comments at face value, and that the Chief Medical Officer, if we remember the measles outbreak that happened a year or so ago in St. John, actually had to suspend broader immunization campaigns during that period of time, because that's not the time to immunize people. You don't immunize people during a panic or a crisis. You do it beforehand. You do it regularly, you do it predictably, and you do it in an established schedule. So I'm concerned when I hear any honourable members trying to cede authority of this legislature, and I understand the pressure that everyone is under, but in the end, on a bill like this, we have to stand or not based on our convictions around this file. because that's what people are going to look for. And passing it on to an unelected official, especially when the medical evidence doesn't support that as being an appropriate avenue, because the chief medical officer herself in the last pandemic specifically had to suspend broader vaccination campaigns to deal with the outbreak, just like they've had to suspend broader vaccination campaigns during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd be concerned that both on medical grounds and the fact that this is veering away from the intent of the bill, which is not around vaccine records in public schools, it is around removing an exemption because those exemptions present a danger that is being abused by people who are seeking to spread fear of science, fear of reason, and fear of an evidence-based approach to society. That's the point of this bill. So I'd ask members to vote for it or not based on those merits or demerits as they see fit.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the member for Victoria-Lavallee.
Yeah, I as well have concerns around whether or not this is actually part of the Chief Medical Officer of Health's mandate. I'm not sure that even the Chief Medical Officer of Health would be comfortable having this responsibility put upon her. So for me, I feel that we're putting an unnecessary burden on her. We're kicking the can down the road. I just feel that if we get to the point where we do have any type of health crisis, that's what legislatures are there for. I'm sure that something can be whipped up really quick to deal with any kind of crisis that we're going to be faced with in the future. So for me, and I'm pretty sure I'm speaking for my colleagues, but you know, we really can't support this because it's just kicking it down the road, and it's putting a burden on the Chief Medical Officer of Health that I'm sure that she's not comfortable with. So those are my thoughts on it. And
Thank you. Any last comments? Recognize the member for Fredericton South, leader of his party.
Well, Mr. Chair, the minister has presented no evidence that the exemption that this bill is intended to remove immediately, or by 2021, I should say, is currently posing any kind of danger whatsoever. And he cites, you know, the percentage of vaccine failures and immunosuppressed people and all these things, but he's not a public health expert. And that's the point. We're not ceding our authority. We're making law here. But what I'm saying is, in terms of actually utilizing this tool to revoke this exemption that would be possible under this law when our top public health expert decides that in fact the exemption in question is posing a danger to students in our school system. She's got the expertise to make that determination, and it's not in the midst of a crisis. It's a question of monitoring, as they should be, herd immunity for the various infectious diseases within our school system, the utilization of the exemptions as part of that, and looking down the road to say, okay, is this, are we facing a problem in the near term or not? Not in the midst of a crisis, and then let the decision be made based on public health expertise. And that's why I think this is important. I mean, I've been unsure from the beginning why the Minister of Education, he says it's co-sponsored with health, but he's been leading this bill and championing it when fundamentally it's about vaccination and ensuring that we have a level of vaccination that protects students in our schools and in our daycare centers, early learning centers. Absolutely. He's provided no evidence that right at this point there's any danger to our students in our school system because of levels of vaccination. So let's bring this tool forward, make it available to the Chief Medical Officer of Health when, from a public health perspective, based on her expertise and the evidence before her or him in the future, if it's him, to determine whether or not this exemption needs to be lifted. So that's my take on this, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, which maybe I like being called Mr. Speaker, I don't know, but it's wrong. So I encourage members to think about this with all seriousness in terms of saying, yes, this is a tool that might need to be used. If, in fact, that exemption, the evidence becomes that exemption is problematic and is posing a real danger to the health of our students and those in the care of our early learning centers and daycares. Let the Chief Medical Officer of Health make that determination based on public health expertise and not on concerns about what impact the anti-vax movement might have at some point in the future on the level of vaccination, when again, as I said, Mr. Speaker, most public health experts view the levels of vaccination and the potential that levels of vaccination should be is really a difference based on primarily parents not having the time or reminders or easy access to comprehensive vaccination clinics. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair.
Recognized Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member, that I mean, the Chief Medical Officer herself has said that she doesn't believe this is an appropriate power for all the reasons that I've stated. So if we're going to listen to the Chief Medical Officer, let's listen to her. And in the end, I don't know how much more I can do to convince the honourable member than to look at his inbox, look at the folks outside on those doorsteps who've been there repeatedly, look at the things they're saying. And I guess my concern is for when the honourable member raises issues, as he rightly should, around environment and climate change based on concerns over what will happen if we don't move quickly. This is the same thing. This is exactly the same thing. And the same forces that drive climate change denialism are the forces that drive the anti-vaccination movement. They are the same people using different tools to achieve the same ends. And whenever we talk in this chamber about abandoning authorities that we have as elected officials, again, it makes it difficult when the honourable member calls, as he has rightly done on many occasions, for increased power and autonomy to be vested in this chamber and for greater responsibilities to be returned to this chamber away from unelected bureaucrats and officials so that people can stand in the people's house and make decisions in the people's business. For those reasons, for the supremacy of the legislature to respect public health and the role that politicians have in guiding and setting principles around public health and the way that our society functions, I'll oppose this amendment and ask members to support the bill in its current form.
Further questions, comments? Seeing none. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the amendment? All those in favor, please say yea. Yea. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. I believe the nays have it. Declare the amendment defeated. So. Any further comments or questions regarding the Bill 11? This is the pleasure of the committee that Bill 11 stand as amended and I report the bill as amended. All those in favor, please say yea. Yea. All those opposed, please say nay. Yea. I believe the nays have it. Declare the motion. Right? The ayes have it? My opinion, the ayes have it. I declare the motion carried. Meeting adjourned.